So I want to talk today about Israel and the problem with Palestine. So many people believe that the problem with Palestine and Israel go back to Isaac and Ishmael. And if you're not familiar, that's where Abraham had Ishmael first. He was supposed to wait until God provided a son through Sarah, but Sarah and Abraham panicked. They lost some faith in God's ability to provide a son, and so Hagar, Sarah's wife, was given to Abraham by Sarah, and she had a son, and they named him Ishmael. And God's favor was not on Ishmael, at least not the favor as far as it related to Abraham. And so Ishmael and Hagar were eventually sent away, and back then sent away meant that they were kind of left on their own in a wilderness. They were sent away, and Isaac became the sole heir of Abraham, and that seems to be where everyone wants to go back to explain the problem with the Palestinians and the Israelis. And I guess what I want to tell you is that it goes way further back. And the reason it's important that we understand this is because it helps us understand the world around us. It's not just about Israel and Palestine. So let's go back to Genesis, to the very beginning, when Satan comes down and tempts Eve, and she falls for that temptation, and then Adam, who it seems like made the actual sin that doomed us, Adam followed Eve into that sin of eating the fruit that was forbidden by God. So from that point on is really where the problem began, because God's curse was on both Satan and the snake, and also on Eve and on Adam. And the curse on the snake was that, which was Satan, the curse was that Eve's seed, Adam and Eve's seed, would crush his head. The curse was, you will bruise his heel, but he will crush your head. And so from that point on, Satan understood that his quarry obviously was with God, but his sub-quarry, we'll call it, was the seed of Eve, Adam and Eve. And so as we read through the Bible, we see where Satan has, by the time of Noah, he has perverted almost all of humankind, so that there was only a few people left in the earth that were God-fearing. And so Satan almost wins. He almost destroys the spiritual condition of the seed, so that there could not be a Messiah. But instead of that, God brought Noah's flood. He punished the people, but he also destroyed the Nephilim seed, which, if you don't understand what that is, it's in Genesis 6, and it appears that part of Satan's plot was to corrupt the seed of man with fallen angels. So Satan immediately attacks humankind from the very beginning, and we see that in Noah's flood. Then after Noah's flood, 6 people emerge out of the ark, and within a couple hundred years, we have the Tower of Babel, where Nimrod and men like him were just wicked, and they were trying to build a tower to prove that they were godlike. And God brings judgment, separates the nation, or separates the people by language, and from there we see people going out into different places. Now, not long after that, I forget how many years, it's 100 years or so, Abraham is called out by God. So now God looks at all the nations, and it appears that there were about 72 nations at that time, and I can explain that maybe another time. But it looks like about 72 different people groups left Babel, and God pulls Abraham out of one of those people groups and says, I'm going to make a special nation that I'm going to bless the world through you. So now Satan has always been attacking humankind, but now suddenly God gives Satan some tunnel vision, and he sees Abraham as being the chosen one. And so Abraham's descendants now are going to be the object of Satan's absolute hatred. Now, Satan hates all of us. And so evil all around us happens because Satan loves to destroy and kill, but especially Jews. And so if you want to see this in real time, we can look at Israel and Hamas. But if you want to see the historical aspect of this, you can see what happened. The Jews were ended up in Egypt. And what did the Egyptians do? They tried to kill all the male babies. Why did they do that? Well, the Pharaoh was trying to reduce the population. But Satan knew that if he killed all the males, eventually the seed would stop. So that was maybe one of the first instances toward the Israelites, Abraham's descendants. And then we can look at the book of Esther. Well, I guess let's look at David. David then became a further focal point. First it was humanity, and then it was Abraham, and now God has provided a clue that the seed of Abraham that's going to become Jesus is going to flow through David. It has to be a royal priesthood. And so David now provides the royal lineage. And so what happens to David's family? Well, first off, David's family has a civil war. It almost destroys itself. But then after David survives that, and then Solomon, and then you have a whole bunch of other kings, at one point there was another civil war in Israel where the house of David was completely wiped out except for one young male child who was hidden away by a priest. And if he had been killed, the promise of a seed through David from Abraham would have been stopped. So Satan was one heartbeat away from stopping the seed. Now, that fails. That boy becomes a king. He has many children. And then we see captivities in Babylon. We see captivities in Persia. We see captivities with Syria. And we see the Jews under tremendous persecution. And quite honestly, it was all brought on by their own sin. But Satan was trying to destroy the Jewish population internally by causing them to sin, by tempting them to sin, and they were willing tempters. And so now we see God's judgment taking these people, the Jews, away into captivity. Then we see in the book of Esther where Haman tries to kill all the Jewish population of Persia. Why does Haman try to do that? Well, that goes all the way back to Samuel, when the king that Saul had spared, he was an Agagite. And when Samuel found out about this, he chopped that king up into pieces with Saul's sword. So Haman was a descendant, probably one of the last descendants of that king Agagite. And so Haman had a special hatred that was inspired by Satan, a special hatred for Jews. And Haman was stopped, and not only was Haman stopped, but the book of Esther tells us that all of Haman's sons were stopped. So it appears that it's possible the Agagite line completely ended at that point. But there's another example where Satan tried to destroy. Now, we go out into more modern history. We can see that there was Jewish persecution throughout history, and we can go to the Holocaust and see it in vivid color. But we can go back not many years before that, and it happened in Russia where there were pogroms against the Jews, and all of Europe was pretty much, it's a history of going against Jews. We also see down in Israel, after the 70 AD conquest by Rome, there were Jews that were left behind, but we see the Turks coming in, and they killed a lot of Jews, and they also made a lot of Jews their subjects. So the Jewish people have always been under attack by Satan. Now the question is, okay, so now Jesus came. Now you might ask, Jesus came, Jesus died, Jesus rose again, and so that promise was fulfilled. why does Satan continue to harbor hatred against the Jews? Now, the Holocaust and the Russian pogroms and a lot of that stuff, that happened all after Jesus. So why does it continue? And this is where we have to look into the future. When Jesus gave the Great Commission, he gave it to his Jewish disciples. His Jewish disciples were to go out into all the world and preach the gospel. And most of them did go out, and most of them did go to, they went to India, they went to parts of Europe, they did go far and wide, but we don't have any record that they got into all the regions of the world. And we know that there's about 7,200 people groups today that have never heard the gospel. So why is Satan still going hard after the Jews? Right now it's the church. The church is the one that is sharing the gospel, or supposed to be sharing the gospel. Israel is sort of set aside. They're not out of the picture, but they're set aside. But why does Satan still despise Jews? Well, there's two reasons. First reason is because he hates the Jews. He just hates Jews. They're God's chosen people. And so anything that God loves, Satan is going to hate. And God has set aside the Jews specifically. So if he can destroy Jews, it puts a blight on God's record. But here's the other reason, and here's the most important reason why Satan still hates Jews. In the end times, I believe after the Christian church is raptured, there are going to be 144,000 missionaries sent out to finish the fulfillment of the Great Commission. Those 144,000 people are all going to be Jews. God is going to bring the Jews back to him, and he is going to begin using them again as that messenger on earth to bring his kingdom forward. And so Satan knows that if he can destroy Jews today, if he can wipe out the Jews, God will not be able to send out those 144,000 missionaries. And those 144,000 missionaries are going to be given a power, a courage. They're going to be able to do things that we're not currently able to do. There's going to be some miracle working probably in their abilities. They're going to be able to learn languages really fast, and they're going to be a very special elite group of missionaries. And so Satan knows that if he wants to send as many people to hell as possible, he has to destroy the Jews to prevent those 144,000. So when we look at the Israeli and the Hamas conflict, we need to keep it in perspective, not in perspective of Ishmael and Isaac, not in perspective of 1948 when Israel was created, but we need to keep it in perspective of Genesis 3, where the curse was given to Adam and Eve and to Satan. And Satan finally understood then how God was going to redeem the world. You see, this is all part of God's redemption plan. As soon as sin entered the world, God immediately began his redemption plan. And the curse was the beginning of that. God demonstrated immediately that he was going to bring this back to what he wanted. Sin was going to be able to run its course, but God had a plan to defeat sin. And so the Jewish people are part of that, were part of that plan and are still part of that plan. And so why do I bring this to our attention? Because I feel like we often forget the spiritual battle that we are in. We forget how much Satan hates us as Christians and hates us as people. And we forget that the spiritual battle is all around us. We don't see the battle, but it's there. And when we look at things like homosexuality, we look at things like transgenderism, we look at things related to race. Satan knows there's one race. He knows that. There's one race of people, and he hates them all. But he has created these intersections where we are now looking at everybody's unique differences, and we're trying to stake ground on those differences. And This is all Satan. God doesn't hate white people. He doesn't love black people more than he hates white people. God loves us all the same, and we're all treated the same in his eyes. But Satan has created all these divisions, and it's spiritual warfare. And we need to understand where I believe as Paul said, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities. This is what's going on. And so Israel and Hamas, Israel and Palestine, that's just like the easy one to sort of pick out. But we need to recognize that all around us is spiritual warfare. And when we don't see that, then we start trusting in politicians like Donald Trump to try and fix our problem. And Donald Trump doesn't fix our problem. Donald Trump can be a president, was a president, and he can do things that are good or bad, but he doesn't fix the overall problems. So we need to stop trusting in our politicians. We need to stop feeling like it's all over because of our politicians. God's redemption plan is in place. He is not going to let us lose. And he is not going to lose. And so we have to stop trusting in earthly things like presidents or kings or legislatures or judges. And that's kind of where I think our church has been, where we are trusting in the judges while President Trump is no longer president. And we're hoping that, he becomes president or a Republican becomes president. But until then, we're trusting in our judges. And guys, this is so backwards. So anyway, I wanted to share this perspective because I don't think most people either know it or take the time to really consider exactly what's going on. It's easy for us to pick sides in the Hamas or in the Palestinian-Israeli debate. The Jews aren't perfect. Israel doesn't always make the best decisions. But I truly believe that Israel is trying to be more righteous than Hamas is trying to be. That doesn't mean that either of them are righteous. But I do believe Israel, and I've read a lot of books about this, and I think that what we have to understand is that there's no solution over there that is political. We cannot solve it politically. Israel can't solve it politically. Israel can't solve it with aid to Palestine. Israel, it's unsolvable because it is a spiritual problem. It is not a political or a geopolitical problem. And that's the message that I think we need to recognize. It's a spiritual problem. So guys, look at Genesis 3 and recognize that seed that God promises that will destroy Satan. That seed is the beginning of the conflict between Palestine and Israel. If you have any questions, put comments in this and I will be sure to read them and try to answer them for you, okay? Thank you.